A few months ago, there was speculation going around that we were going to get a second wave of Hexerei buffs. It kind of made sense because this was a bit before Nicole and Lohan came out, so we thought they would just ship out the new buffs alongside the final Hexerei units. But instead, the buffs we got were for the stellar characters. Well, you know what they say, if you want something done right, you just do it yourself. So for this episode of Unit 2.0, I'm gonna bring out a Hexerei Plus segment, expanding some of the Mondstadt roster and giving them some of their much needed buffs. Because we physical lovers have been neglected for way too long, this episode is gonna focus on Hexerei buffs for Mika and Eula. As always, additional info is down below and captions are available if you need them. Without further ado, let's get started. Before I talk about gameplay stuff, I do want to quickly talk about the lore, because I know a lot of people might be asking, why Hexerei? Why not a new system for the Knights or Church of Favonius? I originally had that idea too, but after mulling it over a bit more, it just makes more sense to expand the Hexerei roster to all Mondstadt characters, and this reason is both in lore and gameplay. Despite the system being called Witch's Homework and Hexerei, it utilizes the Tripartite Conference, which was the alliance between Barbados, the Hexen Circle, and the Knights/Church. Looking at it from the standpoint that the witches are helping to strengthen all of Mondstadt, characters within the Order of Favonius wouldn't be shoehorned into a separate buffing branch, they'd just be included in the one that's already being set up. In terms of gameplay, it also just makes Hexerei much more flexible. It uses a 2 Hexerei characters in the party mechanic, which might feel a bit limiting for team building. The roster for Mondstadt/Hexen Circle units is 25, so if we turned everyone into a Hexerei unit, this limitation would kind of be a non-issue. There would also be way more opportunities for synergies. Varka will have better units for Hydro, Cryo, and Electro teams. Durin and maybe Rosaria/Kaya could be a good example of a free-to-play melt team. And most importantly, it would be really, really funny for Bennett to get unnecessarily buffed. So yeah, in lore and gameplay, it just makes more sense to do a Hexerei expansion over a new Favonius branch. Now, let's get into the actual buffs. First up is Mika, Frontline Land Surveyor, Knights of Favonius Reconnaissance Company, and the bitch that dodged my C6 pulls for a year and a half. Mika has quite a few issues in his game design, which we definitely have to address. While this buffing list is pretty extensive, half of it is just fixing those design flaws. Starting off, a non-Hexerei buff, similar to what Razor has. As long as the duration of Soulwind is active, Soulwind and Detector effects will linger on a character for an additional 2 seconds after they swap off field. This addresses that one issue Eula has, where swapping off to trigger the burst a bit early prevents her from getting Mika's buffs in the first place. This next buff is an actual gameplay buff, but it's still part of the non-Hexerei part. When active party members deal a crit hit while Soulwind is active, Mika fires a Rhymestar Shard at the enemy that was hit. This can occur once every half second, but it only has standard ICD. This passive does a lot for Mika's design. Let's quickly recap how detector stacks are granted for that physical damage bonus. If you tap Mika's skill, each additional enemy hit grants a detector stack. If you hold his skill, it will target an enemy, and each additional enemy on field will create a Rhymestar Shard to target those enemies. Rhymestar Shards generate detector stacks. But with both of these mechanics, Mika can only generate additional stacks in AoE scenarios. His A4 passive can grant a stack when the active unit deals a crit hit while affected by Mika's skill and burst, and his C2 can grant a stack on either skill's initial hit. But if you're in a single target scenario, this basically means you can only generate 2 stacks for a 20% physical damage bonus. With this buff, Mika can fire additional Rhymestar Shards over time, which are capable of creating a detector stack. Even in single target, he's capable of getting to the full 5-stack bonus now. He also gets some cryo application over time, which could be useful in maintaining an aura for the 15% crit rate bonus from cryo resonance. Or, if you play Mika in a stellar conduct team, his extra hits can contribute to the Pulstar stacks. Finally, just like Dahlia... Nope, there's no more Dahlia in this episode, guys, I'm sorry, next time. Finally, something I only realized at 2:45 in the morning, Mika's shards are skill damage. So he actually unlocks access to Tenacity, and in his case, being able to proc this set is more important for his game design. While he's now a Hexerei character and can gain access to Celestial's elemental damage bonuses, it isn't really doing much in a physical team. So at least he'll have a secondary set to play around. What's really nice about this set of buffs is that Mika's physical buffing playstyle is completely free from the Hexerei stuff. So, if you want to run him in, say, a physical build freminet, but the team itself doesn't include Mona or Fischl for Hexerei synergy, Mika can still access the quality of life improvements for this archetype. Now, what about his actual Hexerei passives? I had quite a few ideas, and it might be a little excessive for a 4-star character, but it's always better to go a bit extra and reel it in than it is to hold back and keep adding over time. While in Secret Rite, every detector stack gained will increase the duration of Soulwind and Eagle Plume by 1 second. If stacks are generated within 5 seconds of casting either of these abilities, those can still contribute to the extensions. This bonus just increases the skill duration to 17 seconds and his burst to 20 seconds. This higher uptime can help in certain teams where Mika uses his abilities earlier in a rotation, or maybe in rotations where the DPS is on field a bit longer than expected. But on to the other effect. Each detector stack will now grant a cryo and electro damage bonus, which lines up since the two elements are the superconduct and physical based elements. I was certain on keeping Eula as a physical damage DPS, but I didn't want to force Mika into staying as a physical damage support. There honestly aren't a lot of physical DPS units, so giving him a little more generalization in his kit can help him find more use in gameplay. At the moment, whenever you play Mika in an elemental team, his physical damage bonuses are useless, so his only utility is healing and attack speed, which frankly isn't enough. His cryo and electro buffs will be lower, so he'll keep his best niche in physical teams. I can imagine Wriothesley or Cyno being a good option because they use normal attacks a lot. It can also be a nice side grade for Lohen teams, or a new option for Varka cryo teams. Mika's C6 bonus will also tie in to the elemental synergies. While in Secret Rite, characters affected by Soulwind gain a smaller crit damage bonus to cryo and electro damage. On top of the higher bonuses for elemental DPSs, Stellar Conduct units can benefit from the cryo and electro crit damage, since it can buff stellar damage. While Mika isn't like Diona where she got a direct buff for stellar teams, the new elemental utility he provides can still make him a viable option. Actually, on that note, even though Diona got a set of buffs already, I am still including her in my Hexerei Plus series down the line, so Mika Diona could be a decent option for a Hex-based Stellar Conduct team. Well, maybe. The double healing's a bit excessive. Anyway, to summarize, Mika's new utility gives him a way to maximize detector stacks even in single target, an extension to his current skill and burst durations, access to Tenacity and Celestial Gift for artifact options, and elemental bonuses that branch into cryo and electro teams. I think there is some merit to upping the physical damage bonus itself. After all, 50% for physical DPSs in particular might still be a bit weak, but I'm not sure what number I'd go for, or if I would actually go through with that decision, so I'll leave it up for interpretation. Next, let's talk about Eula. Mika's buffs already grant an additional 30% physical damage bonus because of the improved stack generation. He also now has Tenacity, which is way more consistent on the attack buff as opposed to Noblesse. Then, Eula becoming Hexerei herself gives access to the Rising Winds artifact set, which would grant her 43% attack and 20% crit rate. And most importantly, her old signature goes bye-bye. She gets a new Betson slot claymore through Varka's signature. Compared to her own sig, the new one gives her 33% crit rate, 30% damage bonus, and 30% crit damage. This alone probably isn't enough to make her meta, but because the raw numbers she gets are pretty substantial, I focused more on quality of life and gameplay changes. First thing is an optimization that's going to be really effective in a few departments. Eula's burst will now drain its energy immediately upon casting, instead of after the animation. This is a default change, so you don't need Eula to be in Hexerei, or even complete her side quest to get the buff. This change will help her energy needs because, whether through a cryo battery or her own skill, you can now funnel particles. I also recently found out that whenever a character has a delayed energy drain, the cooldown also gets delayed. So despite Eula's cooldown saying it's 20 seconds, the delay pushes her into 22-second rotations. This tweak will allow Eula to properly function in a 20-second rotation, which is really nice. I actually have another tweak in mind for a small buff. You know when you do Eula's hold skill and it does that combo of the two Ice World brands falling followed by the A1 passive Shattered Lightfall sword? This combo generates Lightfall stacks for her burst. In order for the following Hexerei passive to be stronger, I need this animation sequence to go by a lot faster. Speaking of, let's cover the Hexerei effect. While the Lightfall sword is on the field, Eula will generate a stack of Grimheart for every 2 normal attack hits, and this can occur once every 0.1 seconds. Additionally, when Eula sprints while 2 Grimheart stacks are present, she will cast an alternate version of her elemental skill, identical to the hold version. This is still considered as casting her skill, but it won't cause Eula to enter a cooldown. This was one of these abilities I admittedly put way too much thought into. Let's cover the gameplay aspect first, and then I'll ramble on the thematic and lore aspects. At the moment, the best Eula combo is to skill, burst, do 4 normal attacks, hold skill, then normal attack until the Lightfall sword explodes. Executing this efficiently can generate around 16 to 17 stacks. Oh my gosh, I just did the hand motion. But Eula has a max of 30 stacks, so this number is barely over half the max amount. I wanted Eula to be redesigned in a way that allowed her to generate a higher amount of stacks within her window. When she does her hold skill with 2 Grimheart stacks, this action alone generates 4 stacks. 1 from the initial skill hit, 2 from the Ice World brands, and 1 from the Lightfall sword. This makes it one of the more efficient ways to generate stacks. It kinda sucks that the Grimheart stacks and hold skill sequence only happen once in a rotation, so I wanted to provide a method to allow Eula to trigger the sequence more often, but her actual hold skill is pretty long, so I made it so that a sprint activation triggers the same effects as if you held her skill, but without the animation and hit lag. Being able to multicast this ability is why I brought up the tweak that the hold skill sequence will go by much faster. When you get to the latter portion of her burst duration, the difference in animation and hit speed might make the difference between 3 or 4 stacks before the final explosion. I actually have a combo that works really well at generating stacks. You do the skill and burst as expected, and this generates 2 Grimheart stacks. Since you already have 2 stacks, you can sprint cancel after the burst animation and trigger the skill sequence. Then you do 3 normal attacks. The first 2 are 1 hits, while the third normal attack is a 2 hit. So this combined is a total of 4 normal attack hits, which generates 2 Grimhearts again. You sprint cancel after the normal attack combo and repeat this cycle until the Lightfall sword explodes. Without any attack speed, I only made it to 24 stacks with the combo. With Mika providing attack speed, I was able to generate 28 stacks. And I believe that giving her additional attack speed through her or Varka's signature should be enough to reach the full 30 stack limit. Regardless, all of these are better than the 16 to 17 stack count, and the final Lightfall sword explosion will deal significantly higher damage as a result. Next, as another way to address energy needs, this sprint passive is capable of generating 2 or 3 particles just like the hold skill does. With that being said, there's a cooldown to it. So not every instance of the passive is going to generate particles. I think the cooldown would line up in a way that causes particle generation to occur every other instance. You have the tap skill, which generates 1.5 particles. The hold skill will have an independent cooldown, so the first sprint instance will generate 2.5. The second will be on cooldown, so that's 0. The third will be another 2.5 generation, and the fourth is once again on cooldown for 0 particles. By this point, the sword will explode, so there's no fifth instance to squeeze out particles there. Now this isn't a crazy increase in particle generation. You're just going from a 4 particle average to 6.5, but that's still a nice increase for energy generation. Finally, while her cryo damage isn't that strong, the fact that her new combo results in extra cryo hits allows her to apply cryo more often for that potential crit rate bonus from cryo resonance. It also technically makes Mika's new cryo damage buffs from its Hexerei passive a little more effective for Eula. Now, on to the lore and theme aspects with this idea. Eula is a character who grew up in aristocratic society, and through this upbringing, she was taught how to dance. While I agree that attack speed matters for her Lightfall stack generation, I didn't want her to be so reliant on it that her optimized combo was just a normal attack spam bot. Because we don't have direct dancing animations in combat, I figured a sprint cancel was the best way to simulate a dancer moving around the battlefield. This other aspect I found really cool was just a coincidence when testing out combos. But because the sprint plus N3 sequence I showed earlier is a repeated loop, it has a nice musical rhythm to it. It goes sprint 1 2 3 3 sprint 1 2 3 3 sprint 1 2 3 3 repeating. I don't think the actual combo will follow this exact evenly timed beat, but translating the theme of dancing back into gameplay is kind of like finding that optimal rhythm when executing Eula's attack string. This is, from my testing, the best combo, and if you mess up the combo, it's as if you did a misstep in a dance. Finally, while I don't usually do 5-star constellation buffs for the series, I do want to do a quick idea for Eula's C6. Her current C6 is that she starts off with 5 Lightfall stacks, and has a 50% chance to generate an extra one every time her relevant damage typings hit. This was in place because her current C0 combo can never let her reach 30 stacks, but now that her Hexerei buff has the potential to reach that stack limit, the old C6 is irrelevant. In addition to all the other random constellation changes I don't care to cover, the one I know for certain is that Eula's C6 needs to increase the upper limit of her Lightfall stacks. I'm not sure what number I'd go for, probably 50 or 60. All I know is that if the new default stack is close to 30, the constellation limit needs to go higher if part of the ability is generating extra stacks. So, to summarize all of Eula's buffs through the Hexerei expansion, she gets damage increases via the Mika Buffs, the Rising Winds artifact set, and Varka's signature. She's getting tweaks to cause the energy drain to occur upon casting, as well as faster animation time for her hold skill and A1 combo. And then her Hexerei passive allows her to generate Grimheart stacks via normal attacks, which can be consumed more efficiently through a sprint cancel. This results in higher Lightfall stacks, as well as more instances of her A1 passive hits. Anyway, that'll do it for today. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribe to support the channel. Let me know in the comments what you liked, what you would change, and any other ideas you might have. And finally, if you want to share more ideas with the community, consider joining my Discord server. Thank you all for watching this episode of Unit 2.0 Hexerei Plus, and I will see you all next time. Bye!